everybody, in this week's episode we're actually going to be talking about suicide prevention data since it is National Suicide Prevention Month. So a lot of this data is going to be about the United States, and then towards the end of the video I'll talk specifically about Tennessee since that's the area that we serve physically. So these are from the Foundation of Suicide Prevention, and their website is afsp.org, and you can click on statistics to see statistics for different countries and states and communities. So we're going to start with the U.S. data. The reason why Connections has decided to do this is because we've realized that suicide is a topic that isn't talked about very often, and anyone can celebrate Suicide Prevention Month just by becoming more educated about the issue, especially in your local community. And there are things that we can do to contact certain people and resources to have better access to mental health care for people that might be at risk for suicide. So let's look at this first one. It is for the United States, and in 2021 or 2020, it says almost 46,000 people died by suicide in the United States. And to be honest, that number took my breath away. That is a massive number. And one thing that really caught my eye was it's the third leading cause of death in ages 10 to 19. So with something like this that some people perceive as preventable, it's really sad to see that it's the leading cause of death in school-age children. It's also the second leading cause of death in adults ages 20 to 34. This is a lot of times a very stressful time in life because people are transitioning into adulthood. 10% of people that were surveyed, 10% of Americans, said they thought of suicide in 2020. And 1.2 million people attempted suicide. So this is definitely an area of growth where we really need to, as a community, help people find the resources that they need, and also be good advocates for people who may need mental health counseling services or specifically suicide prevention resources. It says that 72% of Americans don't have access to mental health care. So that is a large number. That is a large number. Let's look at the map. If you look at this map right here, the darker states are in the top 1/3 of suicide rates for the United States. So I'm actually going to start talking about Tennessee, because that's where I'm from. We're the 21st state on the list for suicide rate. So that's not too bad, but we don't want to consider that a win because 1,200 people lost their lives last year from death by suicide. And they are predicting that that would be about 24,098 potential years lost from those lives of those people. 1,200 people in Tennessee would be the equivalent of each county having one death by suicide per month for a whole year. So I'm just thinking about there's one person in my community every month that is, on average, that is successful at dying by suicide. And that doesn't even go into the attempts. So this is something that really needs to be looked at locally to see if there's anything that we can do to be more successful with people that are having distressing thoughts and that may attempt suicide. The age group info is about the same as the United States. So the third leading cause of death in school-age children is suicide, and the second leading cause of death in young adults 20 to 34 is suicide. 84% of Tennesseans don't have access to mental health care. And I would think that many of the deaths that we've seen in Tennessee from suicide could have been prevented, or people could have had more resources had they had access to mental health counseling. Because I think there was a statistic on the first slide that said, yeah, 90% of people that died by suicide in the United States had a diagnosable mental health condition. So mental health counseling is one of the things that I see as a missing key. There is something that we can do about it. So let's look at specifically laws for Tennessee and what schools are required to do. The first thing that I noticed about Tennessee is there is no law that says that the suicide hotline information, like 988 or any of that, there's no law that says that that has to be printed on ID cards. And it would be beneficial if there was some sort of legislation that mandated that, because that's something that a lot of times schools make them have their ID cards to swipe to get in the building, to swipe to get lunch. So it's something that they normally have on them. And so if you're thinking about where can we put this information, where can we put this phone number, where if any of our students are in a crisis, they will always have that number with them. So school IDs is a good idea. Also, not all schools are required to, what's the word I'm looking for? Not all schools are required to take a note from a mental health counselor and excuse an absence. I'm sure that most local policies do accept that, but just check in your local school board policy and see if mental health counseling is an excusable attendance event. Also, there's no legislation that says that if students talk about suicide or suicidal ideations or distressing thoughts, that information has to be passed on to parents. So we definitely have some work to do in Tennessee regarding law. And also, there is no mandated training for suicide prevention for students in Tennessee. And what's interesting is I'm a high school teacher, and they noticed that it was Suicide Prevention Month or Suicide Awareness Month. And they started asking me questions like, hey, can we learn more about this? Because I've got some friends that I've worried about before, and I would love to be able to help them. And so I was actually really impressed by the students' desire to be able to help their friends, or at least help their friends find resources that could help save their life. Just having some training of some sort for students to be able to notice signs, to be able to tell an adult, hey, I'm really worried about my friend. And then this slide right here is talking about the same thing except for the universities. There's no legislation or anything that would require suicide prevention hotlines to be printed on ID tags or cards. And so that is an area of improvement for Tennessee. And colleges are not required to provide resources to students about suicide prevention services or mental health services. So those two things would be an easy fix for getting resources in the hands of people that so desperately need it in these two age groups. So here's where everyone can kind of come into the celebration of Suicide Prevention Month. You can contact your local school board and ask questions. And if you don't think that the suicide prevention resources or policies are stringent enough to really help people in these age groups, you can go to school board meetings and suggest things that you think will help put good information in the hands of our students. Another thing you can do is contact your local legislature or your local legislators. I'll put a link in the comments where you can click on, hey, how do I contact my my local politicians, and you can contact them and ask them to start legislation that requires these things that we talked about in this video. If you want more information, I encourage you to go to the afsp.org website and just click around. There's so much more information that I didn't get to talk about. But this is definitely a huge problem in our community, and we definitely want to do all that we can to protect ourselves and to protect our friends. So if you need anything from Connections Prayer Ministry, reach out to us by emailing connect.pray@gmail.com, or you can also just select comments or message us on Facebook. If you're in a crisis, you can dial 988, and I'll also have some ways that you could text a suicide prevention organization.